We're here to talk about our PFP project. This actually finished back in November, and that was after a 6-month extension, I think, for the COVID delays. So, we should have finished quite a lot of time earlier than that. So this project, it started, let me just see, we had Innovate EPSRC project that was the forerunner to the current project. That finished in 2018. It took us quite some time to get funded again to do the next bit of the work, which obviously set us back somewhat. So this project, 2020, we started, and Leslie joined us for the social science aspects. So Leslie will talk for the second part of the project. So yeah, with PFP, Karnik, who's our polymer processor, David's our physicist, Charlie Davison supporting Leslie, and these were two postdocs that were working in the group on synthetic and analytical chemistry. And very much working in partnership with NextLoop, because that's what came out of this earlier project. And then at the start of lockdown, I remember doing like a Skype interview online as that was trying to be formed, which was quite interesting. So things moved on very rapidly. We did get bits of extra funding out of the consortium. So let's see if I can move forwards. So it's all about sorting. So unfortunately, NextLoop partners cannot be with us today. They've had to zoom off to Romania and various places, but they lent me a few slides. So we're just interested in sorting out this stuff, right? Because we want to find food-grade polypropylene, right? So we want that food-grade material. And we want it to be in high purity and preferably as high a yield as we can possibly get. So that's the challenge that we've been looking at. So, I do have a video next, but I don't know if it will run, or how to run it even. If it will run, just how do I do this? Any thoughts on this one? Oh, it's running. Running slowly. So I thought rather than me tell you what sorting is in what we think, this is what happens. So Tomba are one of the project consortium partners. So the polypropylene waste goes onto the belt. That can be sorted and scanned with an infrared scanner. And then we're looking at actually adding a label to that packaging so that we can isolate the food grade packaging. And of course, we've shown this kind of worked at the first part. Currently, we've got high purity coming out of the system. So this is what we're really looking for. So there's an infrared scanner there. And the beauty of what we were trying to achieve is just a drop-in solution. Keep it simple. Originally, RAP actually sponsored this work. So, we wanted something that's cheap. That earlier project, the recycling partner kept changing legal identity. Every quarterly meeting, they were a different company. And it just made it very difficult. The monitoring officer said, well, you can't actually talk to these guys. But, they were the same people. So we continued on. But clearly, there's not necessarily a lot of money there. So we wanted something simple. So to use the Tomba scanning heads as they were, pretty much. So we're inputting to what's now been rebranded as PolyPrism. Our original project was called Prism. And that's what we're looking at in labeling technology. My background is luminescent materials, like for TVs, CRTs, and so on. That's where I started. So we're not really involved in the sorting, the purification part. Although this bit really needs something that's quite pure. So that's what we're supplying into the system to make it all work. Will change. So how this can be done, and of course, with current projects now, I'm finding different grades of recycled material quite important. So a label is what we need that can separate out different types of polymer. Right? We don't want to have lots of different segregation because there won't be enough material. But you can have your infrared scanner, and then you can, with just a 2-color label system, then you can pull out 2 different materials. The example here is injection molding or extrusion grade materials. So that's doable. Of course, it has to be quite cheap. So the brand owners, they just don't want to spend money on this. So if it's as cheap as possible, that's what we're really looking for. So the second part of the project, from that EPSRC project originally, was to develop just really, really low-cost material. And in that early days, we looked at fluorescent lighting waste material. Right? That would have never gone forward, ultimately, would it? Because that was being stored for getting rid of the mercury in fluorescent lights. That was pumped away. Right? But that dropped away. It really didn't work. So we were looking for very cheap drop-in materials. So we developed a set of materials. We've got greens, orange, reds, really deep red material, actually, we developed recently. Blues. So you might notice we've got RGB as well for my display. I'm always thinking about how to make more money for the people that may take up and produce this. Right, so that's where it has to be. How am I doing for time, Leslie? We're doing okay, we're okay. And then we've looked at life testing, ink compatibilization is a lot of the work we've done. And it's important that we don't affect the label. So this little spectrum here, the coating with our luminescent material is pretty much invisible. It doesn't change the pack in any way. You can see under white light, it's just like looks like white. Under fluorescent light, this is actually a very low concentration yellow, actually, and the kind of reddy colour. Colours are quite often changed depending on the camera you're using actually in the projector. But under UV light, you can see blue light. So we've got a whole nice range of kind of invisible materials. We supported a lot of packaging developments for runs out in Germany at TOMRA. And you can see, as I point out to some people, this pink pack is different to this one that looks pink here. This is reflecting white light. This is emitting light, right? And we're looking for the light emission in the sorting. Just wanted to say something very quickly about this because we work with a lot of master batch companies that are looking at recycled polymer. Of course, the stuff that's coming out of our Next Loop partnership is, it doesn't smell, right? And even at the midterm review, we had some of these materials here. I was quite worried they may open the packs and sniff them, but they didn't smell, right? So that was okay. So nice materials coming along. Now, I just wanted to say something about what's happening currently, right, in current times. So my partners gave me this couple of slides this week. So very recently, AI is becoming a big thing, right? So, of course, AI sort of technology is a big extra cost to recycling plants, so it isn't really the way we want to go. But the bottom line is that if you've got to introduce a new layer, you're going to then have to look at everything going through the system, any toxicities, any of your NIAS stuff. And if we can just get rid of that, then that seems to be quite a driving force. So TOMRA have been working on this in the background, which they trialled last week, actually, so I'm told. And they got really good purity and yields similar to like hand sorting trials at the moment. So, as sad as it is, my industry, back then we were looking at fluorescent lighting, and then all of a sudden it was just, everything's LED, right? Just swept the board. No one saw it coming. The DOE didn't have a clue in America, and it just happened overnight. So, I see AI taking a strong current lead on where we're going. There's still some places for labels and markers, right? They won't be out completely, but I think this will be a very strong future direction. Of course, we won't be defeated in our research, of course, so, we continue on. So, of course, on the side as well, I've had a PhD student working on developing these materials, looking at other applications, as I said, to make a proper business for this, and we've been making very, very low-cost displays. And we see, we've got nice RGB kind of displays coming along, although our red is really too long a wavelength for that at the moment, but we've been playing around moving that and learning how to move that emission band. Currently, it's way down, like 700 plus nanometers, right? But of course, just going into lockdown, we were wrapping up this Lightweight project, where we developed vertical farming units and algae growing troughs, right, to make that work really efficiently. So there's still scope for what we developed. How are we doing? Now, I'm done now. Of course, what my centre is really known for is extrusion processing. So we've supported a lot extrusion processing in the consortium, Next Loop, helping them prepare NIAS trial stuff. And of course, we've been thinking about what could we do with that first fraction of material, you know, that RPP that you're not going to stick into food. So we have a nice little project running now that's wrapping up actually in a couple of weeks' time. But we've got these products, and well, John Lewis, you can go buy them now if you want. These are all made from recycled polypropylene. BIF are a partner on that project. So we're trying to look at utilising all of those fractions if we can. So just a very quick summary from me. We developed materials, knowledge, how to use these materials and do something really useful with them. We supported the commercial trials and the development of this food-grade RPP that's been trialled by all the consortium members. We're able to get an extra PhD student. Miles has now become a member of my full-time team, so he's got a permanent staff job now. They continue to fund our research fellows separately. And yeah, lots of projects are now actually coming out of these interactions because we've been so well exposed during these NERC workshops. Leslie, I'll pass to you.
Okay. Thanks, George. So yes, just to hear from me. So I'm adding the social aspect to this project. I started at Brunel University in social and political sciences, and I've since moved to University of Strathclyde. So just to give a shout out to my new Scottish home. Yeah, and I think, you know, in many ways, our project is quite unusual in terms of the kind of portfolio that we're funded under the SSPP, where George and I sit, you know, very, very different in terms of our backgrounds, disciplines, and so on. But we got along well when we first started discussing this, and we hope to carry on working together. I wanted to look at, as others have talked about this afternoon, people's perceptions of plastics in their everyday life, specifically in relation to retain, reuse, and repurpose. Something that was really innovative for me to do was to have the level of exposure and connection to all of these brands as part of the Next Loop. So I was able to kind of feedback, take questions, potentially also add some questions from the different brands, which, you know, worked really well. I was completely independent in terms, you know, scientifically and so on. But it just meant we could have that really constant dialogue, and that Next Loop was a really good way to kind of mobilise that. And I've had a lot of support from them. You know, I'm sure I don't need to tell everyone in this room, but social dimensions matter. They're everything. That's where the consumer, the policymaker, people are making their decisions or not. Within everyday life, and even within the lifetime of the project, things have changed so much, you know, even in terms of these politicians kind of coming and going. Boris's, you know, what's the point in recycling kind of headlines, Michael Gove, who was, you know, saddened by Blue Planet and so on. And there's also been some pretty alarming stories emerging around plastics in terms of, you know, risk to human health. And I think one thing I would just like to say is that, you know, the kind of plastics research world is very siloed, that the researchers who are working in recycling are not necessarily working in microplastics, nanoplastics, and so on. And I think it's fascinating, and that more connection needs to happen within and across, because the public are receiving these messages in particular ways, you know, not only receiving messages about recycling and what they should do. So in terms of what I actually did, I coordinated this section. I should also say we were probably one of maybe the smallest project that was funded under the portfolio. So we worked with, you know, our budget to explore how people interacted with plastic packaging in terms of what they knew, but also how they felt about it within these particular sort of concepts, from recycling to labelling issues. For George's original technology to work, we needed to know if people were removing sleeves, the sleeves needed to stay on, or we need to think about kind of in-mold markers and so on. So we're really interested to kind of get into people's homes, basically, which was really challenging during COVID. So we had lots of rounds of ethical approval, which had to be administered, as closely to the time of data collection as possible. So I got to know in detail, regions of Spain and Germany where they had kind of relaxed the idea of wearing masks and so on, how we could be as inclusive as possible whilst, and encouraging people to participate who might have protected characteristics or might choose not to be vaccinated. So it was quite interesting. So in terms of what we actually did, there were different kind of sections to the research sessions. One thing I wanted to do was to have a kind of point of continuity, given all the variables, that every household would actually take part in this plastics challenge. So I had literally a plastic bag. We had a plastic bag which was relevant for the specific country and the region and so on. And in it we had lots of plastic items, some of which I had received from the Next Loop consortium, like this clover butter and the this kind of ice cream sauce. And then people took them out one by one, with their kids and so on, said, does this go straight into waste, straight into recycling, or are we not sure? And that was really interesting, obviously, in terms of kind of knowledge. So some people, when they saw this black package here, they thought the number on it actually meant the number of times it could be recycled. If it said 5, it means that that's okay. It was interesting to look at how people actually interacted with all of these different products in different ways, and to be able to do that in situ is quite different to how people might, respond to a survey, for example. So they were able to actually show us what they did with everything, and we've mapped all of that. Some of the key findings, very sort of broad brush. Resources matter, it's an inequalities issue. Obviously, as a sociologist, I'm always looking at, inequalities. Lots of people said in particular areas of deprivation, the government doesn't care, the council doesn't care, the council doesn't come and pick up the rubbish that falls between the two bins at the back of our, tenement close. When Maria was talking earlier about, sort of bin people as being potential agents of change and educating and so on, obviously what I got from the consumers, from the people, was that they often didn't have their bins collected at all, that they had to go and run after them with a key, please go out, because it's a real hassle in areas of Glasgow, for example, to actually get to the bins. Waste systems and sorting plastics in particular specifically seemed like a privilege. I mean, I felt sometimes some of the interviews, some of the households that I was in, people are really, really struggling, and the idea of sorting your plastic, going to the reusable, that came through over time, that lots of people said, I used to go to the really nice, cool, refillable place, but I can't do that anymore. I can't afford it. Similarly with deposit return schemes, putting specific plastics in containers, some of the people I was interviewing had chronic health conditions, didn't have a car, all of that. So I think we just have to kind of bear those simple things in mind. So I felt that solutions are frequently gendered, very ableist, and do make assumptions about resources. Some of the diversity, what was interesting was that in the UK households, they felt that the best way to deal with waste was, to spend the time, spend the labour, cleaning, washing. That was very, very gendered. Most of the men that were in the households didn't do it. And sanitising. The Spanish participants had never heard of this. What is that, 5? 3, fine. Had never heard of anybody washing, couldn't understand why they would do it. There were big differences in terms of younger versus older people. Older people expressed much more positive views about the value of plastics, particularly around food waste and so on. Younger people would talk about, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could go back to the time where meat was just wrapped in muslin and things like that, and everything was more simple and authentic, which was quite interesting. Just a couple of points here. TikTok was a key source for millennials. Lots of people actively avoided doom scrolling. They liked the stories of hope. Boy and slats, clean up, the oceans, worked really well. So yeah, just a couple of headlines here. We need a better understanding in terms of more research. We need to look at how and why consumers interact with specific plastic products in specific settings. it's about much more than disposing waste. It's about identities, it's about performance, gender and so on. In terms of relationships with waste categories, in Spain, for example, people just threw it, in the yellow, throw it in the yellow bin because the depot will take care of it, whereas in the UK we're having to work out what specific materials it is. And I think my final point here, media can help shape behaviours and create connections. If I've just got 2 seconds, I can say lots of this research is fed into Pisces project, which is a big GCRF project that I'm involved in Indonesia to mitigate plastic waste. And there's been lots of events, including, for example, at the Royal Society on Ocean Legacy Plastics, that I've been able to feed these insights back. I've developed this Plastic Mythbusters, looked at all of the things that people say that are potentially not true around, more plastic than fish in the sea, eating a credit card of plastic a week. And we've now got over 5,000 people have actually taken part in this, and we've got nearly 1,000 responses to our survey. So I'm analysing that with the Institute of Coastal Chemistry and a science journalist. I've also set up a doctoral training centre. Sorry, the students love to take photos, so that's a photo of me with my students. Doctoral training centre in social dimensions of plastics, where we've leveraged funding to support these students. We're looking at lots of different dimensions, and hopefully, they're going to be the next plastics leaders. And final slide. It's a very different setting, but some of the insights in terms of how people attach meaning to plastics in everyday life are being used to support this work, which has been funded again in Indonesia, looking at open burning. We know that open burning of plastic is a huge problem. Thank you.